Hello and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and I'm happy to be back after a break. I didn't have an episode last week because Mario and I were traveling. We were coming back from my homeland of Milwaukee, Wisconsin after a nice long trip to celebrate my brother's wedding and some much needed family time. So glad to be back. Summer is basically upon us. We're almost to the summer solstice, so that's always a very exciting time. And with that, I'm just very excited for my guest today because she is kind of new to my field of research and information. I was introduced to her through her husband's podcast, the Third Eye Edify podcast, which is hosted by George Mesa. So I have the pleasure of speaking with Nicole Petra Mesa today. And we'll talk about the name switch in a little while, but I was referring to her as Nicole for a while. And she, as we were backstage and figuring out all the details for the show, let me know that she is now going by Petra. So that's what we're going to refer to her as today in the stream. So Petra is the woman behind Earthside Birth Services. She's a student midwife, a doula, and a birth worker with years of experience and lots of wisdom to share. Today, we're going to get into her story and her journey towards becoming a birth worker, the benefits and details surrounding natural birth, and how death and birth are very closely related and why both should be honored and not feared. Now, when I first heard her interview with George, I really almost instantly knew I wanted to talk to her and have her on the Healing Home for multiple reasons, but birth is one of my interests. I think it's so fascinating. I always am honoring the women who take it into their own hands and have the courage to do home births and kind of go against the grain in that way, even though it's becoming a little bit more popular. I think it's actually more popular than a lot of people know about. It's just that mainstream society kind of suppresses it. But, with all that said, I think that we should just welcome Petra into the stream, and I'd like y'all to welcome her with a warm and open arms. So, hello, Petra. How are you doing today?
Hi there, everybody. I'm great. Hope you all are doing the same.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm very excited to talk with you and get into your practice and all the things that you do as a birth worker and beyond that, because I can tell that you have a lot of experience, lots of stories, I'm sure, to share. And whatever you feel most comfortable sharing, I say we go for it here because it's a great platform to do so.
Sure, yeah, I'm open to sharing whatever
awesome.
I can.
Nice. And I wanted to, before we really get started, I did something new this week that I don't normally do, but I was gifted a really great Oracle deck, which I'm usually more into tarot, but this Oracle deck was sent to me as a gift. And the moment I opened it and I started looking through it, it just really resonated with me. So it's the Herbal Astrology Oracle. And I picked a card before I came into StreamYard, and the card that I picked was Nettle. And I kind of thought that was quite fitting for even our subject matter because Nettle, as you might know, you probably know, is a really wonderful herb for mothers who are, even if you're not a mother yet and you're wanting to get pregnant, it's before, during, and after birth, it's really wonderful because it's so nutrient dense. And this is one of the, highly regarded herbs in the wise woman tradition, which I really follow and really honor because it's all about nourishment and it's all about there's really nothing wrong with your body. If you're having something going wrong, it's about nourishing that problem instead of trying to mask it or trying to act like it's not there or act as though it's not a part of your story. And so I found that Nettle was pretty fitting that came out of the deck. And in their deck, they put it under action, which is really awesome too, because Nettle's ruled by Mars, which, has a lot of fiery energy, action oriented. It gets things moving. It's one of the first greens that comes up in the forest in the springtime. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know if you are familiar with Nettle or if you work with it in your practice at all. Do you?
I don't know. I'm not working really primarily with herbs. There are times where I'll use some essential oils perhaps,
Mhm.
but I don't know enough about herbs to incorporate it into my practice. And that's something that if I um would be further down the line when I'm more educated as far as midwifery services. Right now, I'm really in a supportive role, so I'm just not quite there yet.
Awesome, that's one thing too that I always honor is when somebody can just be honest about where they're at their on their path,
Yeah,
'cause it's something I think we learn with age too that, when you don't know something, it's best to just say you don't know, and that was, something that the herbs actually taught me, and I had to get more clear with that sort of thing with my ego, and so I'm just glad to hear that that's your approach, but I think that, you seem like the type that would probably, end up going in that direction in some way with plants because it's just so grounding and earth based. And I think that there's so much connection to birth and the great mother and mother nature and the wisdom that comes through the plants, that can help in
yeah,
all sorts of processes.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do definitely use herbs and certain plants in other ways. Either infusions or really like ritual baths and things like that. But as far as like medicinal purposes, right now it's just not the time for that. And I think that in general, that's something that what I see a lot happening is midwives just using that because it's alternative and it's not considered a medicalized form of treatment. But in that, the honoring of the plants has kind of been removed and it's kind of being taken for granted. So I think that that's really important to acknowledge and in moving forward in my journey, keep in mind is to stay with the honoring of these plants and the connection that it has to the earth.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. I think too, I'm in the same boat as you. I think that they get thrown around a lot, and they're not fully understood, which that's when problems can arise. And so I love you. I like that train of thought that you're on because it's a really great way to just show the plants respect. And when you respect them, they respect you, and then they share their knowledge, right?
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
well, right on. I want you to have an opportunity to introduce yourself as well, and let people know where they can find you before we get into questions and the full interview.
Sure. So I am going by the name Petra. Currently, I am kind of in the middle of this transformation where I've left the medical system more recently than not. And I'm stepping into this role that has been really behind the scenes in my life for quite some time and somewhat of like a burning need to change. And the timing is finally now. And so there are a few reasons why I changed my name. But before I get into that, if that's something that you wanted to talk about, you can find me on my website. It's earthsidebirth.org. I am not the only Earthside Birth Services. I keep doing that all the time. Um, and so I am, yeah, earthsidebirth.org, not .com. There's another one. Um, and I'm also on Instagram, and I'm sure that you'll have it in the show notes because my name is quite long on Instagram. It's Petricola Filatiformis. And if you are not into marine biology at all, you probably have absolutely no idea what that is or how to spell it. So I will trust that it will be in writing in the show notes for you to find.
Yes, it certainly is down there in the show notes for sure. Yes, because yeah, I mean, I'm happy that you are here. And I'm always like wanting to just spread the word about people who I find are interesting in things. So people can find all of your links down below. And believe. No, you don't have a Telegram. Is that right? No, you're just on Telegram.
I am on Telegram. I am
Okay.
on Telegram. It's the same name.
Okay, cool. I can add that after the show. So
Cool.
well, right on. So yeah, let's get into the name if you don't mind, because I always find it interesting as to the shifts that people feel like they make with their names, and I know that names mean different things to everyone. So let's, if you feel like talking about it, I'd love to hear your background on that and what inspired the change.
Sure. So I mean, first and foremost, it's part of me breaking away from the system that I was working for over a decade. I was in the medical system as a nurse, and I specialized in OB triage in the most recent years. And part of shedding certain parts of that former identity is taking on this new role. And it's not just inner work that I do, it's my full identity that I want to really change. It's inside and outward. I don't want people that I used to work with, former colleagues, to see me and think that I'm even remotely the same person. I want people to look at me and say, wow, she is totally different. Is that really even her? No, it's not. It's a new version of myself. That was really a part of me all along, but being held back by the constraints in my position as a nurse, and just in general, it's very hard to live your truth in that kind of system. So it's hard to walk the line and to follow your real path, and be tied down to rules and regulations and following orders. So that was part of it, but Petra in general, I mean, is it's a female version of Peter, which is kind of a family name. It was my grandfather's middle name, so that's kind of important to me. But the meaning of it is rock or a large stone. And I just found that was very fitting in what I do as a birth worker, because I consider my job really to be the rock of support that women need in order to find their own empowerment. Because empowerment to me is not something that we get from other people. So I see a lot of birth workers saying, I empower women to do this and to do that. And I just don't see it that way. I don't think that that's something that I can give to other people. I can try to help guide you to find your own empowerment, because it, like I said, comes from within all of us. It's something that we own, but we have to find sometimes. It's not something that is obvious to us all the time, especially after years and years and generations of being woman and being told what to do and how to do it and falling in line and all of our good girl programming. And it's not something that a lot of women can easily grasp. So I found that the name just in general was fitting to what I aspire to do as a birth worker in general. So
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And yeah, I love that, because no one can show us our own inner strength better than we can, and we have to go through these situations of life to find it. And there's going to be people like yourself who could be that person or that rock for another woman to actually maybe finally take the initiatory steps to unlock something in herself, instead of being in a victim mentality or always seeking outside validation or outside, just perspective on your own opinion. I think that kind of drives a lot of people to always looking for an external messiah or an external out for something that maybe you are actually the cause of, and I think that there's a lot of blaming that goes on in the world. And so I think that if you can work with a woman in such a time where they are pregnant and they're bringing another life into the world and they start to maybe even learn these lessons for the first time, then the likelihood of them imparting that onto the child that they just brought into the world is even higher, which is beautiful because we need more people like that. We need more
Yeah,
people that can take
absolutely.
accountability, right? And
Yeah.
admit when they did something wrong, admit when, things didn't go right, and admit whatever they need to admit. So kudos. I really like hearing that,
Thank
especially for
you.
a person in
Mm.
your position. It's awesome. Because there's a lot of people that know the lingo to make it sound like they're walking that walk, but it's different when the rubber hits the road and you actually have to really start, applying these sorts of things to your
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people, and it's not just birth work, but it's just in general, have this savior complex where they think that they're bigger than they really are. And, I try to stay humble because birth is so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than all of us. There's just no comparison. Like where I stand in this whole grand scheme of things is very small to scale. So, I think a lot of people let it go to their head and think that they're a lot more important than they are. And also get kind of off on taking like a lead role in somebody else's birth, which is very medicalized and, you know, and very egotistical.
I'm muted. Okay.
I
That
was like,
act
oh, I can't hear you.
You saying that leads me into a question that I think it's kind of further down on the list, but, well, okay, I guess we can just go into it from here because when was it? And on your website, you have a beautiful run through of your story. But for people who haven't seen your website yet, I want you to get into, what inspired you to actually want to become a birth worker in general. And then I mean, I guess it was probably just through experience, but how have you through this journey learned your role as a birth worker and known your boundaries? And how are you able to establish the boundaries? Because I imagine it's different with every single woman because every single person's going to have different needs, right? But if you want to maybe go through that side of things, what inspired you to get into this work? And then how do you work on creating boundaries within this form of work?
Sure. I first started hearing the call to birth work in 2009 when I was honored and blessed enough to support one of my best friends during her first birth experience. It was a hospital experience. And her husband at the time was in basic training in the Navy and was not able to be there with her. So I was lucky enough to be able to support her. And I mean, looking back, it's funny how I had already had my first child and my first birth experience, and how little we knew about really anything. I mean, I was very young when I had my first child. I was 19 years old, and I very much was going through um, the motions and doing what I was told, and I was so ignorant and so naive and so disconnected from my body. Um, so I um, I feel like that kind of having come from that and starting from that, is a constant reminder of the boundaries that I need to have in place, because in that experience, I was very much disrespected and very much disregarded. Um, I I remember seeing my seeing my chart by accident. They obviously did not want me to see it, but I remember glancing at my chart, and across the flow sheet, the nurse's flow sheet, in big bold black letters, it had teen pregnancy written all over it. And yeah, so
Whoa.
so
Okay.
yeah, I was very much discriminated against. And towards the end of that pregnancy, I had severe pitted edema in my feet and my legs, um, which my doctors basically flat out refused to look at for themselves, and refused to take my word for it. And even my mother at the time had said, I don't think that this is really like normal swelling. And she had, she has 6 children. And they wouldn't even after that, they wouldn't look at me. And what ended up happening was I ended up in the hospital with hypertension, and I was induced for for gestational hypertension, and that same 4+ pitted edema. But it wasn't until I went into the hospital, thinking that I was in labor, because nobody had explained labor to me or what to expect in the weeks leading up to birth. I may have been in early labor, prodromal labor, for some time, but I was not really in labor. But again, timing, divine timing. And I ended up in the hospital, and it was the attending in the hospital. It wasn't even my doctor, who finally saw my feet and was like, "How long has that been like that?" Well, at this point, it was probably close to 6 weeks where my feet were that swollen.
Wow.
So boundaries are knowing what we as women go through, um, in that position as a birth worker. I kind of have that. I feel like I have that insight. So, especially um, having supported women in the hospitals, and being able to like give people little nudges here and there, and be like, maybe we can think about it this way, and maybe, start thinking about presenting this to this doctor in this way. Or, you can always fire them if you really want to. People don't realize you can fire a doctor at any given time, even if you're in the middle of labor. But yeah, so, but yeah, that's where I started with my experience there. And now in supporting her, which was a very medicalized birth as well. And the next step for me was to go into nursing school after that, because I didn't know anything about what was wrong with our experiences at the time. And all I knew is that I loved how I was able to be there for her. I loved that role. Um, and I was good at it. So I was persuaded by family to go into nursing. So I did that with the intentions of becoming a certified nurse midwife, and that never worked out. Even when I did go back to school to continue my education, I suddenly had to stop because I had an issue with my son that needed to be addressed at the time. And I went through a lot of really traumatic birth experiences, and I saw traumatic birth experiences, and I saw how women were being treated in the system, and just ignored and coerced and bullied. at times. And I really fell out of love with what I did very quickly. And on top of that, I was exhausted and drained, because that's what working as a nurse or any role in the medical fields will do to you. I remember, like, towards the end, I really did start getting firm with boundaries, and I really did start getting vocal, because I was pregnant for the fourth time, and um and I was planning a home birth, but I was working in an OBGYN outpatient. I was working in OB triage. So there were very few people in the office that I shared that with, because I knew people personally who were told by certain doctors within this practice, why would you do that to your child? Or why you, like, you'll end up dead, or something like crazy. And so I was very quiet about it, to majority of those people. But after COVID and all of that nonsense and all these crazy things, the vaccine mandate was really like it was like my final, that was my exit. But it kind of was like this big snowball where I kind of stopped caring about what was said or what was coming out of my mouth. And it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep myself quiet. And I remember one time I don't remember exactly what the situation was, but it was regarding a C-section, and or inducing somebody. And I ended up turning around to the doctor and being like, you would just cut everybody open if you could anyway. And he did not like that. P.S. It was really,
I believe it. Yeah. That's what he
it
needed to
was,
hear, though.
it was really, it was, and I mean, like, so boundaries, I started crossing boundaries really to find my boundaries almost. So, I had to kind of get really ballsy, which is not something that's not natural for me. But I really had to kind of, like, stop caring about offending people. And yeah, I mean, boundaries are different with everybody. And as far as clients go, I mean, everybody works differently. So, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I don't put, I ask people to be respectful of my time. If it's not an emergency, if you don't really need me, like, contact me during the day, or, it doesn't, like, I'm very cool with that. I'm really just, be respectful of my time. If you have an emergency and you need to call me in the middle of the night, I'm not going to not answer the phone, you know. But there are people that have, this is these are my business hours with, this package, you know, with
Right.
this package for this price, you get, X amount of prenatal time with me. And Monday through Friday, during normal business hours, I'm available for phone support. And I don't want to operate like that. I don't think that it's, I don't know what you're going to need. Like, part of this is us figuring that out together. A lot of the time, you don't know what you're going to need until you need it. You don't know what questions you're going to have until they come up. If it's a question that comes up at midnight, maybe wait until the next day to, it's not really like, there are people, I mean, it's different. I think it just is kind of touch and go, and I'm still kind of navigating, that. But sticking to your guns and having the respect for yourself and knowing your own needs, I mean, is important for that, for knowing your boundaries. And that's just kind of like a general thing, not just birth work.
Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story with that.
Yeah, no
And
worries.
This is usually the path. It's like the path of the wounded healer. You went through the system and you were working in it, and you had firsthand experience with your own situation and then seeing it happen to other people. Um, I always think about people who never have the courage to do what you did, to start standing up, then to realize I cannot do this anymore. And as you said, the whole 2020 was your exit. So it was like that was a blessing in disguise for so many people for so many reasons. But that being like the last straw, it's so unfortunate to hear these stories because you hear them all the time for birth, for anything. You go into allopathy in any level, there's always these kind of heinous stories, or you hear certain things that people are told and you're just like, wait, what? That's what they told you or whatever. And you're disregarded and you're treated as a number. I mean, really, that's basically what it is. And then I love that you are open to keeping your lines open for the women you're working with, because just like anything in life, as you said, you probably don't know what you need until that moment when it happens. And I think that that's really important. And one of the things that it made me think of was I was looking on the program that you are working with currently, Indie Birth. You're currently a student midwife with them, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and I noticed that they had a podcast. And so I listened to a portion of one of her episodes, and she was talking to a woman who had a hospital birth. And she basically felt as though she needed to push. And, she basically was told she shouldn't push. And she talked about the kind of basically the regret she had for not doing that and being told by the doctors that she shouldn't. And then she went through the other things that happened. She was given, is it called Pitocin, correct? Is that what
Yeah.
right? So she was given these things and whatever, the protocol, that's what it is. It's all protocol. It's all standard of care. And it hurt my heart to hear how her body told her it was time. And the doctors were like, no, not yet. And then she just resisted that. And, and rightfully so. You're in I can't imagine what that situation would be like. I can't I've never been in that situation personally, but just hearing the story, it's just it's heart-wrenching to think that that's what people go through and women go through when they're in a trusted, the arms of a trusted person who's going to actually help them bring new life into the world. To hear that, she had to go against her own body, what it was telling her, to kind of, humor the doctors in their own sort of way, to make them feel as though they are in the right and as if her body doesn't know what it should be doing.
Yeah. That resonates with me quite a lot because it sounds similar to my second birth, which was extremely traumatic for me. And basically, the same thing happened. First of all, I did get an epidural, and I immediately felt like I had to push. And I was told, no, there's no way, you just got the epidural, blah, blah, blah. 20 minutes went by and I really had to push. And the nurse came back and she still was like really like poo-pooing me and just did not believe me. And I had already had a baby at this point. Like I knew what it felt like. And so she did a cervical exam. She didn't even really get to go inside of me because my baby's head was right there. And she immediately was like, okay, we're going to get this catheter out now. I'm like, yeah, how about you do that? Because I asked you to do that 20 minutes ago. You know, so I had held that, back, and all of that energy because I was told that I couldn't push, that it wasn't time. And nobody believed me. And she immediately, started prepping everything, and I was crowning, which means that the widest part of the baby's head is, exiting the birth canal. And I crowned for probably the better part of 15 minutes because the doctor was stuck in an emergency cesarean section, and the nurses did not want to deliver my baby.
Wow.
So I had my bedside nurse and the nurse manager in my room, as far away from me as they could be, on the complete opposite side of the room, arms folded, backs against the wall. And they were yelling at me not to push. They were yelling at me, raised voices, yelling at me, "Don't push. The doctor is not here." And my mother, who was with me, was like, "If you need to push this baby out, you push this baby out." And I just was so conflicted because my body was telling me one thing, but I had never been lifted up in a way and encouraged to listen to my body. And here I am being told not to listen to my body and not do what my body was telling me to do. And these are the medical professionals that we all trust and that know what they're doing. And I was afraid that I was going to do something wrong and that I was going to hurt my baby, when in reality, my baby could have been severely harmed from being in that position for as long as he was. It could have had a very different outcome. And the saddest part of it is that I worked for that group at the time, and I felt completely betrayed by the people that I worked with at that time. And yeah, the doctor ran into the room and was like, "Okay, push." And at that point, it's like I had been holding back so much for so long, and I had remained so calm in my body, in that space, in my mind, that I could not push. I absolutely could not push. It was not working. I didn't know what to do. I became totally detached from my body. And yeah, it eventually, I gave one actual push and he was born. But there was a few minutes that it was very scary that I couldn't push my baby out. And I'm grateful that I didn't have more interventions, because that's always a possibility. But yeah, that story resonates with me very much. I have been there, and it is very traumatic. And I didn't recognize that trauma for a long time. And I did have a very severe postpartum depression afterwards. My baby was diagnosed with failure to thrive at 6 weeks. And I was told that I couldn't breastfeed anymore, that I had to supplement with formula at that point. And yeah, it was very devastating. So it was just one thing led to another. And I ended up with severe postpartum depression that completely ruined my life for a long time. But yeah.
Wow. Well, you're transmuting the energy with your work now. And I just want you to know I appreciate you sharing this. And I know it's not easy to revisit some of these topics. So I appreciate your bravery to share, honestly.
Mhm.
And it's part of the healing journey. And it's part of the reason why I've started this podcast, because I know the value in speaking our truth and speaking our story. And I know that there's even people in the chat just talking about how their story isn't much different. This is a friend of mine, Stacy Sunshine, who had a similar story. Brandon Stark says, story sounds so familiar. Thank you for sharing. People have a lot of this stuff happen. And one of the things that just continuously came through my mind as you're telling this story, and this is where my mind always goes with stuff like this, is conflicts. The conflicts that arise during this. And so you literally illustrated, you went through like a whole fight or flight situation into PTSD during labor, and it was so obvious as you were telling it, the fact that you were ready to push, you're being told and yelled at and denied and telling, you're not being believed. So automatically then subconsciously, you're going to go into this defense mode, this fight or flight. So then your body responds to, wait, I don't know. I don't remember how I can do it. So you froze. And that to me, it just blows my mind that that's what's going on. And I'm not surprised just with how this industry works. And then again, the feeling of betrayal from, fellow coworkers who you thought you could trust, and I honor you for leaving that, leaving it behind, because it's like the best and only thing you can do when we go through situations like this. And I'm just glad to see you've come out on the other side, really, because and glad to hear that there was really no serious adverse effects, for yourself or children, that, the ultimate. Because one of the things I know that we were going to talk about, and we talked about weeks ago behind stage in chat, was, the close relation to birth and death. And one of the things that just has continuously come up in my mind as I prepared for our talk was just the thin line between death and birth while you're giving birth, how close you can come to death, the mother and the child. And that there's almost like this gray area, it seems. And just to be clear, I have never given birth. So I have never gone through it personally, but I have helped a friend of mine with 2 of her births. And just doing that, I feel like I have a sense of what happens. I've witnessed things, but I've never felt or done the whole process myself. But the things that I have observed with losing people or pets and then seeing birth happen, I cannot ever forget how closely related the two are. And so I wanted to riff on this thought with you, because too, with hospitals, I mean, it's a common thing that's said sometimes, but babies are born in the same place where people go to die. And it's just like a crazy thing to me. And the powers that be, the allopathic system, they know this link. They know that there's so much juju and power with these processes, and that they're actually very positive, both of them. And I believe they should be honored and not feared. And so I wanted to just kind of pick your brain and get your opinions on this dynamic between birth and death.
Sure. I mean, personally, I feel the energy at the place in the birth space and in the death space is very similar. It's simply an entering or an exiting, but the energy is very much the same. And I feel like, I believe that our spirits come from the same liminal space. I don't think that it's a different place. I think that we re-enter where we have come from. And I think that it's super important to honor that. And I think that the fear that controls birth also controls our death planning. And I don't really have all of the answers and how, other than to educate people and spread the word, how to make that change. I think that there's just a huge disconnect from us as a culture, and the honor that really needs to be demanded in this liminal space and in these very sacred moments. I don't think that they're honored as natural processes at all. It is just life events that are very scary and people don't want to think about, and that are also taken for granted. I think that birth is very much taken for granted a lot of times. I have absolutely personally taken it for granted, thinking, naively that everything would just be fine, and not having the consciousness or the awareness of what happens in any natural process is not always a happy outcome, and it's not something to be feared. It's just how life is. It's how the natural world goes. It doesn't make birth unsafe. It doesn't mean that death is scary. It's just a part of what we have to go through in this human experience. We come into it and we exit it. Um, you know, I don't think that people really think about how they want to go. I think that our souls before coming here decide to join us or not to join us. I think that that's a big part of it too, that people think that they have a lot more control than they have. You don't have control. You don't, on a cellular level and on a spiritual level, you really don't get a say in how things turn out. And we're lucky to live in a time where we have these tremendous medical resources when we need them. But I think that people need to understand that that doesn't make it safe. And it doesn't mean that your outcome is going to be positive, because there are people that have these medical resources and still have unfortunate outcomes in their births. And that's just how life goes. So when you honor that, and when you respect that, and when you are able to accept that it's bigger than you, it kind of puts things into perspective. But it's a lot to think about it, and it's a lot to take in. And we do live in a culture where we don't want to think about dark things or sad things, or we're hurt by so much. There's this wound and this tremendous misconception that everything has to be sad. Death is I'll share, I had the honor of being with my godmother recently in her transition, and it was an incredibly peaceful transition. And I'm so grateful to have been there with her. But it doesn't have to be scary. It's okay to be emotional, but people just don't want to accept it, because we're told oh, that's too hard. We don't have to think about that now. And it's well, when it's not a natural part of life, because you don't want to think about it until it happens, it's no wonder why we grieve so hard and are unable to get through our grief in a healthy way and move past that and accept loss as a part of life, because we're told that, no, that's too much for me, dude. I don't want to think about that, man. But it doesn't make sense to me on any kind of level, really.
It's don't harsh my mellow.
Yeah.
And that's, I know it's I truly do believe, and I've just noticed this about myself from a young age. I've never really had a fear of death. Okay. And I think that everybody's different with this. There's propaganda, there's movies, there's all these things. So with that, I feel like I've had a different perspective on it. But as I've gotten older and as I've just continued to realize more things about myself and the world or whatever, I truly feel as though death is our one of the, if not the most beautiful gifts that we're given as physical beings in the 3D. And I think birth is the same way. So I think that these are just some of the most precious gifts. And the fact that they're shunned in so many ways, or they're turned away from, or they're feared, I just think that people who are in that mentality are missing out on like the juiciness of life in some sort of way. Because then I feel like too, if you're avoiding anything, then when something comes up, it's going to be that much harder for you to deal with, obviously. But specifically something as big as death or birth, if you've avoided it, and then all of a sudden death happens, oh boy, I mean, that's just going to be so much more harder for anybody to deal with. And I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful, oh, go ahead.
No, it's right. I mean, you think of, a lot of people, choose to shelter their children from these topics.
Hmm.
And, other cultures, not just birth, but death as well, is very much ingrained into the culture and accepted and respected. And, we live in a place where we try to protect our kids from all of these really, it doesn't have to be traumatic, even if it's hard. Even going through what can be perceived as traumatic from like by some people, it doesn't have to be perceived as traumatic when you understand that it is a natural part of what we go through, and that it is not meant to be feared, that it is meant to be honored and respected. And you really just have to show up to it and see it, and be a part of it, and again, come to it with respect and not from a place of fear. I've never sheltered my children from death and dying or birth. And my daughter watches birth videos with me all the time, and she knows when she sees it, oh, that's a mommy, like before the baby is born, she's like, oh, it's a mommy. So it's important to me, for them to see life through a different lens than I was brought up, you know um not seeing birth as this, you go to a hospital, your mommy's going to go to a hospital and I'll be back in 2 days and I'll have a baby. And leave all those questions, all those wonderful questions that I want to be the one to answer, and I want to be the one to teach her, not a doctor when she, decides she wants to be pregnant. I don't want anybody else teaching my children about these things. I want them to observe them for themselves. I want them to learn by seeing and being a part of life. So I think that that's a big part of it, is how we're raised, how people shelter their children and choose to, I'm sure it's with good intentions. We all just want to protect our kids, but it's just like this mindset of, oh, these things are so bad for them. It's like, what? It's all the bullshit that they see everywhere else. Birth and death are bad for them. Like, they can be so much more traumatized by what they see on television in one commercial break than, throughout their entire childhood, of learning about these very natural parts of all of our lives that are inevitable. Death is inevitable. And I won't say that birth is inevitable, because sometimes it doesn't work, which is another unfortunate part of, our human experience, but it's just a natural part of life. But not every soul that begins its journey in the womb is destined to be born. Not every soul chooses to come earthside. And that deserves to be respected and honored as well, because at any level, it is a soul and they do make that choice. And I don't have that, I don't have the power to choose for anybody else here what they do with their lives. Why would it be any different for a child in utero? It's the same thing, in my opinion, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's so funny too, because the point of people wanting to protect their children, yet they're willing to put them into a public school where they're being shoved, where things are being shoved down their throat that you can be a girl when you're actually a boy, and you're being told that it's okay to do whatever. And we don't have to get into all of those details, but the things that are being pushed on children these days, it's pretty mind-blowing then to think that if their protection would be to keep them from death and birth. It's just such a
Yeah,
inversion of what's really important and what really stands, and then it just becomes so obvious that there's an agenda out here, to be doing all sorts of weird things from young ages, and it gets younger and younger, and there's a lot of weird perversion happening in that sense. So to think that death is uglier than these sorts of things that we're kind of touching upon, to me, is just it's so telling, and it's so obvious to people with eyes to see and ears to
yeah,
hear, that it's I don't know, it just makes me happy to know that you see it the other way, as I'm
yeah,
very not surprised that you and George are in that boat, because it's very important. And I just really am just so grateful for parents like yourself. And I threw up a comment from Family Fungi, our friends James and Elise. Elise is also a doula, and she has some really cool stories. And one of the comments she said was that her son always asks, can I watch a lady give birth? And so
oh, so
being
sweet.
yeah, being around this environment with when his mom is, in that line of work, and he's curious enough. And she's also told us things where at bedtime, one of her sons asks for stories about death. Like, so it's like children naturally want to know about everything, but I think
Yeah,
they naturally want to know about these very basic, yet complex things that happen to us in our lives. Um, and the more that we can make it normal, and the more that it can just be a topic around the dinner table, I mean, the better for everybody, because then the parents don't
mm,
feel as though they're holding back, because the holding back of anything, always creates a conflict, and it will create all sorts of weird things. There's going to be resentment that can happen, and all sorts of stuff that is negative, that will affect you in a way worse way than saying death is natural and it happens. you know?
for sure. I mean, I think that going back a little bit, that's the saddest part of death, is that we think that it's so tragic, and it's not something that needs to be seen as tragic. Yeah, there are sad circumstances in how people leave us at times, but death in and of itself is not something that needs to be seen as something so terrible. Um, I think too that parents, up until this point, because as a very young parent, and to now, um, I think that there's definitely, a change in consciousness with, parents that are my age, my kind of generation, compared to um, people that are a little older, where, especially when I grew up, there was almost like this, oh, they're too young to understand
Yeah.
mentality. And no, it's not that these children can't understand, because, children, they just don't get the credit that they deserve. They are so intuitive, and they're closer to that liminal space that they had just come from than we are further into our lives. So they have much higher connection, than anybody really gives them credit for. And it's really more about the parent not wanting to deal with that. The parent can't handle having a conversation about birth. They can't handle saying the word vagina and penis to, a 6-year-old, but like, that's your body. And we have this, that's wrong. You can't do that. You can't talk about that. That's inappropriate to talk about with children. And it's like, so we're teaching them at right off the bat that their body is inappropriate.
Right.
So when they get to the point where they're ready to become parents, it's already inappropriate for them to even think about what their body does in a functional sense, let alone take the responsibility and own it and be able to say, no, this is how I'm going to do this. They're already going to be looking for somebody else to tell them, what do I have to do here? So I think that that's a big part of the problem, but I love that your friend's son asks to watch home birth or just birth videos in general, but that is really special because I think that boys especially are sheltered from women's mysteries and birth and things like that. And that's a big problem. So when, when these young boys become men and are looking to step into this support role for their partners about to give birth to their child, they don't have that experience. They don't know how her body functions. They've never seen birth before. They're completely uneducated about female anatomy, how it works, how they can be in their body and come into the birth space respectfully of what her needs are and how to be a support person. So you're already setting them up to be completely dependent on this very failed, broken system that isn't serving them. It's just perpetuating itself for business purposes and power and all of the things that we already know. So I really, really love that. And I have two older sons. My two older sons are going to be 15 and 12 this summer. And when I started getting really into birth work, as opposed to being a nurse, I've always been very vocal about changing that and about the problems that I've seen at my job with the doctors, in the system. I have tried not to shelter them from that either, because it's going to break my heart if they get to the point in their lives where they're ready to become fathers and they go looking for answers in a doctor's office. And, so I'm trying to change the narrative, in their own lives and show them, beforehand. And so part of that was inviting them. And of course, I left it up to them. I discussed it with them. I had, again, watched birth videos in front of everybody all the time. It's not like they haven't seen it before, but I did invite them to be present at our home birth. And they did both choose to be there, which was very, very special. So I hope that made an impact on them, because I know that my oldest son remembers me going into the hospital to give birth to his brother. And, at that point, prior to like all the craziness a few years ago, you could bring siblings into the hospitals. I don't know if they're doing that anymore. I don't know what they're doing with visitation or anything in the hospitals now. But, he just knew that there was a baby and he could come and visit. So I hope that the experience for them was impactful in a way that will influence them to at least just seek knowledge and truth in their own way, because they're old enough to where, I can have discussions with them, but they're established a little bit already, I think. And we'll see. They're their own people. I can't really dictate what they do or how they feel or what they think. So we'll just have to let it unfold. And I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing over here.
Yeah. I mean, that's all you can do. And even on a subconscious level, though, you've interjected something into them that maybe it won't be at the forefront, but that is always going to be with them. And, the work you're doing too, as I believe, our actions through our ancestry, it's all a chain, it's all connected. So, even just the work you're choosing to do, I think could influence them on a subtle level that they don't really understand, and I think that, I always do keep that in mind though, too, remembering that a parent can do everything under the sun to make something seem like it's going to run one way, and then because they have free will, boop, the other way. I mean,
Right.
how many times have our parents probably looked at our lives and gone, "Oh my god." You know what I mean? And so it's that mirror, so yeah, all you can do is just continue to be the mirror in a positive way and then see how it unfolds,
Right.
really.
Yeah.
And so speaking of family, one of the things I wanted to get to was, when you decided to do a home birth, was your immediate family, were they supportive in that? Or did you kind of have to, fight them a little bit or convince them that this was what you were going to do and you're okay with it and it's going to be just fine?
I think that at that point I had established and been vocal enough about where I stood with the medical system and where my heart really was as far as birth. And I don't think that they were necessarily surprised. I was met with a lot of anxiety from certain people, but I wouldn't say that I had to fight anybody. I think that especially my mother at this point in my life just understands that I'm going to do what I feel I need to do. And so she definitely had her reservations, um, but 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 she wasn't unsupportive. No, um, and which is something that I'm really grateful for because so many people are met with that, and navigating other people's fears is just so tricky and exhausting. But yeah, I didn't have unsupport. I encouraged her to come to my midwifery appointments with me, which she did. And I just included her in the conversations that I had with my midwives. And I kind of just trusted that she would see and observe and understand. And I just had faith in that that things were going to go how they were going to go, how they were meant to go, and that she would see and come out with a different kind of understanding of home birth in general, which is exactly what happened. It was uh, a little bit of a dramatic experience, but not traumatic. And I want to be clear about that because a lot of people, I think that I know you were asking earlier about some of like the misconceptions that they have out there about home birth, and I think that the first thing that comes to mind is that it's unsafe and that midwives are um, less than other birth professionals, for lack of better words. I don't really like the word professional, um, but less skilled and less trained and less educated and just less than, which is just, I'm sure that there are, because no matter what profession or whatever skill set you have, there are always people that are kind of like, meh, like on the bottom of that skill set. But that kind of goes back to what you were saying about taking accountability and responsibility. Like, it's your responsibility if you feel like you need a midwife. Some people feel like they don't, and they have free births at home, which is totally valid. But if you feel like you need a midwife, that's your responsibility to do your research and to vet these people and to know where they stand with their training and their skills and what their experiences are. That's not their responsibility. I mean, people can be very deceiving, and
Oh
not
yeah.
everything that they put in front of you is reality. It's your responsibility to feel that connection, and to build your birth team. And that's what I did. I felt very safe with my birth team. And I mean, people think that, as far as safety and birth, like there's this level of safety depending on the location and the setting, and is it medicalized, is it not? Birth is birth is birth. Any natural process has risks to it, and it's something that people just don't want to accept and take responsibility for. But like, that's how it is. So that's part of the problem, is owning it. But yeah, the safety is not like really a thing. I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
Just kind of like the misconceptions of home birth, and why somebody might say, "Oh, that's dangerous," or whatever.
Well, yeah, well, you see things like, things can happen in birth, in any event in your life. Things can happen walking out your front door. People say that all the time. Well, you can get hit by a car walking out your front door. It's like,
Mhm.
it's true. You don't know how things are going to go. You don't have control over anything that happens in your life, and birth is no exception. It doesn't mean that it's unsafe. It's just how it is. And I mean, I could have gone through my last birth and been very traumatized from it. Or I could come out of it and say, well, I knew that this was a possibility. I chose my birth team because I knew that this was a possibility, and I own it. It's mine. I made that decision. The like complete lack of taking responsibility for our own choices is just detrimental to our culture, and us as women. Everybody bitches that we have no voice anymore, and we have no power. We have no choice. We're always told what to do, and the patriarchy and this and that. But the biggest problem with that is that we've allowed people to do that to us, and that we have allowed people to take on the liability of our lives, and the accountability and responsibility has been given to other people. And what else is going to happen? How do you think our lives as women will be when you don't take responsibility? Like, own your shit.
You on that. And whoa, I know, this is such a great conversation, by the way. I just have to say that I can feel that we can go into so many places, and I knew that this was going to happen. That was my gut instinct. But it's so true. It's the victim mentality. It's they did it to me. Oh my God, they're doing it to me. They continue to do it to me, and whatever, and not being able to stand up and just be a woman, be okay with being a woman, knowing what that even means. Society puts on this, it tells us what a woman and what a man is. And really, you get this Hollywood bullshit sort of version of everything. Okay. Women are, what is it? Sugar and spice and everything nice. And then the man looks this way and the woman looks this way and she dresses like this and it's supposed to be like this. And in the reality, when you really step into your role, when you finally get to that point in your life, if you get to that point, when you finally step into that divine role, you realize that that is like seriously furthest from the truth. all the
Mhm.
things that we're told, what we're supposed to do or what it's supposed to look like, it really kind of doesn't look anything like that. I always think about that. That kind of thing with like a relationship, a romantic relationship, usually a Hollywood movie or a Disney film, oh, you're in a room at a party and the room stops, everything slows down, and then your knight in shining armor comes through, and then you just know in that moment. And it's not to say that you don't meet someone and in that moment know, oh, well, there's something about that person that I want to know more about, or I feel as though I'm attracted to them, or whatever. So it's not to say that that can't happen, but it puts on this really weird expectation for people and what it's going to look like when you meet the person that you're supposed to be with for the rest of your life, or when you
Sure.
actually finally get into that situation that's going to change your life or whatever. It doesn't even have to be a relationship. I think expectations are what kind of really are detrimental to so many things. And it's kind of one of the things that I've tried to do in my life is to not have expectations for anything, because then you are projecting something onto something that then you're going to create anxiety. You're not in the moment. You're not allowing the thing to be what it actually naturally should be because you have an expectation for it. And I think like that's a big part of where we are as a society and the gender roles and what we should and shouldn't do, and yada yada yada.
Yeah, when you take all those things away, you're also, taking even the opportunity to make an actual human connection with somebody, and to give yourself the opportunity to listen to your intuition and to listen to what your body is telling you, and to observe fully with all of your senses. Um, and going into kind of like these expectations, it's important, I feel like, to really look at where these expectations are coming from. Um, what comes to mind, like kind of where I'm going with that, is the expectation, for doulas to be certified, even for midwives to be licensed, is a really, something that really strikes a chord to me. And again, I am somebody that went into the medical field as a nurse with every intention of coming out as a certified nurse midwife. I would have been a very different person. I would have been highly medicalized. I would have had the same savior complex that I had in the first place when I started this journey, 14 years ago. And and you know, these expectations are just made up. What are they based on? There is no even, and like, for doula work especially, it really, really bothers me because, like, we have these things like nursing and midwifery that have already kind of been medicalized, and like, yes, we're really trying to dismantle that and rebuild that whole paradigm, and change the way people see, um licensure, and to make the to put the awareness out there that the problems that come with that. But there is no governing body for doula work. Okay, there's like, oh, DONA, and there's organizations, and um, they're not government bodies. They're not through the state. They're not through the federal government. They, you know, where we came from in New York, there was one doula association, and who is dictating that you need to be certified through this body? Nobody. You don't need a certification. And I don't need a piece of paper to tell me that I know what I'm doing. I am on a totally different level. I'm not like only, and I don't need you to teach me all your textbook shit in a 2-day workshop to be good at what I do. And nowhere is the spiritual side of birth taught, the sacred aspects of birth, the liminal spaces, nothing of that nature is brought up at all. It's so lacking. And I've had a lot of people turn me down because I'm not certified. And I'm like, well, I don't need to be working with you kind of people anyway. Like, tough shit. I'm not certified. I want you to be comfortable. You have the right to find a certified doula. Go for it. I'm not going to go get a certification because I had a few people tell me, oh, you're not certified? No, bitch, I'm not certified. Like, I'm not certified. I'm not going to get certified. Like, do you even know what that, like, you don't even know what that means. It means absolutely nothing. So, yeah, so it's something that I can obviously get fired up over. And, you know, there's so many issues. It, it's like, it's basically just telling you that you're trained as a doula. Well, I am trained as a doula. I did take I did take a 2-day course. I chose not to continue and get that certification, but I'm trained. I also have over 12 years of experience in the medical field as a nurse, and have an abundance of experience in you know, birth as far as that goes, in my personal life as far as that goes. Like, you're going to tell me that means nothing because I chose not to get this piece of paper?
Right. And you basically chose to not spend money to get the piece of paper because
Yeah, and to
you know,
continue, and then, oh, you want to be a part of this organization? You're going to pay us, you know, X amount of dollars every year. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue working the way I'd like to work, and I'm not going to fit into your box. You know, like, this is like, we do it to ourselves as women. We build these little organizations and these cliques, and we're like, no, you have to fit here with us or you're not going to do this. And no, fuck that. That's part of the problem. We're all complaining about things that, you know, like, the patriarchy is putting us in these boxes and telling us how to live our lives, and we're doing that to each other.
yep.
And it's like, just so hurtful to see, but you can't really do anything about other people, can you?
No, no. We can only just continue to do our thing and live by example and hope that you ping certain people and, you know, something inside of someone might be inspired by something you do, you know, and the fear is just such a driver for so many people. And just like you say, it's like, okay, the doula certification. So you're going to have to memorize all this stuff, which really doesn't actually educate you. As we all know, anyone who's gone through schooling, public schooling of any kind, you know, knows that you're pretty much forced to just memorize shit, go and be tested on it. And you never actually really retain most of it anyway,
And
because
you're not
it's
really taught anything. You're not
no.
really taught anything. You're just taught, like, if A happens, you do B. It's very, like, computerized almost. And you know, I was thinking about this earlier, like, as far as, like, the pharmacology training that I went through, I could tell you what medications are for. I can't tell you what they're made from. I
Mm,
can't tell you where they came from, what compounds are in them, what chemicals they're putting in these medications that they're pumping through everybody. They keep certain things on lock for a reason. You're just meant to go through the motions. Absolutely what you just said, memorize everything, take these tests, and go to work.
yep.
And then you don't have the time to make the connections with patients, to be there with your patients. I was, you know, absolutely, with the birth of my daughter, I was in a hospital. It was my last hospital birth. Um, and I was just in, like, this very beginning phase where, like, all these things were really rubbing me the wrong way, and I didn't want to be a part of anything, but I didn't know what else to do because I'm really the first of my kind within my immediate circle. And so I'm discovering things on my own. I'm making my own connections and trying to build my life out of something that it was completely different. And so not having that guidance, I did have another hospital birth, but it was different in the sense that I absolutely had boundaries. And I had a really cool, like, for a doctor, he was pretty cool, but
It can happen. It can happen.
and I want to be clear, like, you can have a beautiful experience in the hospital. And one of the, my favorite indie birth stories is Marin's free birth in the hospital. You can look it up. It's on their website. It's absolutely beautiful. And you can have a great experience in the hospital, but you have to own your shit. And, so I did have a lot of boundaries put up in the moment, and it was 2020, and it was just my husband and I. I wasn't allowed to have a doula. Doulas were not allowed in the hospitals, nobody and I was lucky enough because it was right after the start of everything. I was lucky enough to where I could have him and I didn't have to be alone, because the most atrocious thing I felt that I saw happening, not necessarily with the practice that I was with, but around me, especially in New York City, they were absolutely flat out refusing to have any support person, including father of the baby, be with these laboring women. So they were absolutely by themselves. And I don't think it's any secret that these nurses are completely overrun in the hospitals, and they are not with you. They don't have the time to sit with you and to support you and to hear your concerns. And they're not connected like that usually anyway. Sometimes you find a really cool nurse that is like really with it. But I mean, as far as they can be in the system anyway. And so anyway, yeah, it was just my husband and I. And we did prepare as best as we could in the middle of like these lockdowns and all of this craziness for this birth. It was also 9 years after my second birth, so there was a good amount of time. My body was different, was a little older, but yeah, I had gone through my own physical changes as a woman, and it had been a while. So, I was going through it with a new mindset, but it was almost in a lot of ways like going through it for the first time. And I did not want an epidural. I have a really bad back problems in the first place. Then I absolutely have issues from the previous epidurals that I had with my back. I have bad nerve pain. And towards the end of my last pregnancy, it was just brutal, like this nerve pain. And people will probably try to tell me, doctors will try to tell me that, oh, that's not from the epidural, that from all those years ago. It's absolutely from the epidural those years ago. It's nerve pain. It's in the exact spot that you shot me up in my spine. Don't try to tell me what it is.
Right.
But the point is that I knew I didn't want an epidural. I knew I didn't need an epidural. And I was absolutely coerced into getting one. And what sucked about that the most is that my daughter was born like not even an hour and a half later. The same exact thing that had happened with my second birth happened with her birth, where I got the epidural and I immediately felt the urge to push. And this time the nurse was not like poo-pooing me, but she was like, oh, okay, well, let's give it a minute because you just got it and whatever. And she came back 5 minutes later and was like, nope, gotta push. And she was like, okay, I'll get the doctor. Like, it was a much better experience, but still similar in a lot of ways. And yeah, I don't remember where we started with that, but But yeah, I was definitely medically coerced into getting an epidural at that point.
Yeah, man. I mean, and it's just, well, we were talking about basically like the boundaries of if you are going to do a hospital birth, knowing that you kind of have to be able to stand your ground in certain ways that you maybe didn't the first time, or, what have you, if you're choosing to go that way. That's kind of
Oh yeah.
where we went. But
Where we started with that. Yeah. I mean, so there were boundaries that I did let down. After having it put into my ear, but there were a lot of boundaries that I maintained also. um, One of the things was that I was diagnosed as a gestational diabetic, and I had pristine blood sugars. I was checking my blood sugars, totally diet controlled. I was in better shape pregnant than I was prior to my pregnancy. And they still wanted to schedule me for an induction. And I said, I'm not going to be scheduled for an induction before my due date. I knew I wasn't going to go to my due date because I just knew. Um, so I let them schedule an induction for my due date, but they called me and told me it was going to be with this other doctor that I did not want near me. And I simply said, no, thank you. And the person, very confused, was like, what? I'm sorry, what? And I was like, no, I'm sorry. I'm not, I'm going to decline that appointment. I'm not going to come to the hospital that day with that doctor. And she was like, oh, well, I have to talk to the doctor and see what they say. So, yeah, you should, because I'm not coming. So, I mean, like, you talk to them all you want, but let me know when this other doctor is available. I'm sure it won't be but a few days later, and everything will be just fine. I have absolutely no problems with me. So, I'm not going to schedule an induction if that's the case. I'll see you when I see you. Like, it was very calm, but very firm. You can have a lot of power in the medical system when you know that you're not required to bend for anybody. Like, yes, okay, you can hear what these people have to say, you can take in all this information, but you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to do anything. I've seen women, and I mean, I'm not recommending this, but I've seen, I had a patient, a few years ago when I was in the system, that these doctors were losing their minds because she was diagnosed with a placenta previa, which is where the placenta is covering the cervix. So what happens is when you go into labor, you bleed very quickly and a lot. Is usually what can happen. So it's very scary to these doctors, and they tried so hard to get this woman to come in for a section. And they wanted her to come in 2 weeks early, 38 weeks.
whoa.
And which is very typical for the medical field. And this woman flat out refused. She said, no, I'm going to wait until she agreed to schedule a section and go in for a section, but she wouldn't go before 39 weeks. And they tried so hard, and they used fear tactics. Their fear, I mean, even when they don't mean to use those kind of tactics, it's just inevitable because it just emanates from them. Every word that comes out, that you can feel the fear. And I just was in this place where I was worried, of course, for her well-being and for this baby's well-being, because you never want poor outcomes and you never want to see people go through, hard things. But the fact is that this woman was owning her body, and it was so incredibly powerful to witness. And I really appreciated that, because that was a really good lesson for me, seeing that, because even when she knew that this was a possibility, she owned it. And that's the kind of shit that I'm talking about. You know that things can happen. You know that you can bleed. You know all of these things, but understanding that you have no control and trusting the process and having the faith, like that's what I'm talking about. And if she had decided to schedule a section, fine. If that's her choice, if she's getting all sides of the picture and having all, all of the information presented to her so she can make real informed consent, then fine, schedule your section. That's all I care about, is that you know, and that you have the option of making these incredibly important decisions and owning your shit. That's all I want. It's like, go ahead, do it, but own it.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's all you can really do too is like you have to at some point too, just like we were talking about with children, you have to acknowledge that everybody has free will if you believe in free will, right? But everybody has choices that they need to make and you can only do so much to try and influence them and you have to almost like let go and release it and know that they're going to do what they're going to do. And I think like that's part of this whole process of just being okay with being more of a teacher, being more in a role of leading by example. I think part of being in that role is knowing that you can teach, lead all day, but that doesn't mean that people are actually going to follow. And you have to be okay with that. And I think like that's one of the most healing things in life that you can learn too, and I think doing this type of work is the stuff that shows us that these great lessons from doing stuff like that. And exactly what you're saying, of just like owning your shit and standing in it and standing in strength, it's kind of like the cliche saying of, what is it? Something about like speak your truth, even though your voice shakes or something like that, like along those lines, that same kind of thing is even if your voice is shaking, if you're still speaking your truth, you're like doing the work. You are doing yourself a service. And then you're honoring everyone around you by just doing that. And so speaking of services that, are honoring traditions, before we start to wrap up, I just want you to talk a little bit about Indie Birth as an organization, because that's who you're learning through. And when I was on their website and looking at things, I was like, oh, this is freaking awesome. And people even in the chat were talking about how they operate as a PMA. So that's something too that's very interesting. But if you just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how you found them and why you chose to work with them and study through their program.
Sure. So I found Indie Birth through my husband, who listens to Crow 777, and came to me one evening after I had gone through my home birth and was in the middle of processing this and kind of like where I was standing at that point. I had left the system right before I had my home birth, so I was kind of in this place where like, what do I do next? Because I, for so long prior to that, had really just kind of given up on becoming a midwife. Even though, and it was super conflicting because even though I had given up on that, but I felt this calling like this whole time. And it's like an urge to do what I just know that I am meant to learn these skills and this wisdom, and to offer this practice to honor women in this transformative sacred time in their lives. And anyway, I had given up that because I did come from the medical system and I didn't know any other way other than being a certified nurse midwife. And so my husband had come to me and said, you need to listen to this podcast. You have to listen to this. It's incredible. there's this midwife on here who's talking about all this birth stuff, and it's really cool. And I was like, all right, cool. So it was absolutely just like immediately, it was like the light bulb went on. It was like a ta-da moment. And it was very simple. And it came down to the fact that everything is a choice, and that I don't have to go about it as becoming a licensed certified nurse midwife. And I don't have to go through the schooling, and I don't have to pay all of the money just to come out of it in debt, and all of the things that I have been told and made to believe for so many years, that this is what it looks like to be a midwife, and this is your training, and this is how you go about it, and even this is what you wear, you know, and this is the uniform, and it's professional, and this is how you look outwardly, and it's everything is dictated. And so I absolutely was under that impression, and it just came so out of nowhere, but easily at the same time, to understand that it does not have to be that way. And there are other ways of learning. And that's when I discovered that people do learn solely through apprenticeship, which is absolutely valid. And especially for somebody like me, who learns best by doing and observing it, and being present and feeling the energy. That's how I learn best. And so I just immediately, I think I might have even emailed Marin that night, and I was just like, soul sister, where have you been my whole life? Almost. And yeah, that was it. I immediately just like started. I think that I've read everything on their website. I'm still going through the podcasts, because there's just such a plethora of information on just, I mean, pick a topic, it's probably on their podcast. They've probably discussed it at one point or another. It's just such valuable information. But other than that, I think that I've really like read through their website a few times over. That was January of 2022. And January of 2023 of this year, I found myself in Hawaii, in Oahu, on this beautiful retreat with these beautiful, incredible women, meeting Marin and Margot in person for finally. And that was it. I think that before I got there, I knew that that I was just ready to do this. And I got to a place where, similar to birth, I feel like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, the time's not right, and this and that, and excuse. And, but, you know, but this is happening in my life right now. And really, there's no right time to have a baby, because it's always the right time. It's meant to be when it's meant to be. And, you know, if you let things like money and all the other stupid bullshit that doesn't really matter in your life, like, dictate when you live your life, you're never going to fucking live it. There's never, like, money is going to work itself out. Abundance will come to you. But it was, you know, similar to that. I kind of came to the conclusion that the only thing holding me back was myself. And I just really had to say yes and take the step, take the plunge into it. So I am just starting, you know, my education with them. But one of the things that stood out the most was that exactly what I was saying a little earlier, is that with these doula trainings and midwifery trainings and all these highly medicalized educational curriculums, there is no mention of spirituality. In nursing school, you have the little ethics and, you know, whatever little course they want to throw your way to like say like, yes, are now trained in, understanding different backgrounds and, religious beliefs. And it's like this big of a paragraph. There's no mention of real spirituality or anything sacred. And that is definitely probably what stood out the most, is that they absolutely intertwine that and acknowledge that. And everything that we've been talking about this whole time about honoring the space and honoring the woman and owning your shit is what they're about. It was just hearing Marin speak was just like, it was everything that I had inside of me that I couldn't verbalize, that I knew, but I couldn't speak yet. But it was just so incredibly powerful. And so that was how I discovered indie birth. And I could rant and rave about how wonderful they are probably forever, but
Dude, yeah, that's great. I love it. I mean, those moments when you have that aha, the epiphany, the light goes off. Oh, I mean, you can't deny them. And it's super cool that George was the one that introduced you to it, because you guys are the unit. You're the ones that are bringing
yeah.
children into the world together at this point now. And so it's really cool that he kind of initiated that for you. And that's what our partners and our true ride or dies in our lives do.
Yeah.
They're usually the ones that bring something to us that is just like, it's so glaringly obvious, but we needed it to come from a source of love, someone we trust. So I love that so much. And just going through their website very briefly, last night and the day before, I was really excited to talk to you about it and hear why you chose them. And I say right on, because that's freaking awesome. And
Yeah.
I look forward to just like seeing the rest of your journey and getting to know you more and seeing how it all plays out for you, because this is really cool. And it's
Thank you
very
so much.
inspiring to talk to you for sure.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Oh,
Indie Birth is also having another one of the retreats in October. It's again on Oahu. It's incredible. And I'm not, a spokesperson for Indie Birth officially or anything. I just love them incredibly deeply and really believe in the work that they do. So if anybody is really interested in becoming a birth worker in any capacity, whether it's a radical midwife or a doula, I would definitely just encourage you to check it out, do your own research, and just see for yourself. Don't take anybody else's word for anything, including me.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's why I always like to say too, it's like, do your own research. I can tell you what I know and what I've learned, but you have to at some point want to accumulate your own source of information,
I
and
mean,
what.
everything is really relative and up to perspective also. So like I can say one thing and it can be taken and seen in a completely different lens through somebody else's eyes. So yeah, do your own research and your own work in this world. And that's that.
Yes, I love that. And so before I let you go, I want to give you the floor so that you can, again, like in the beginning of the show, let people know where they can find you. As I said, all your links are already down below. But just, let people know anything, if you have closing thoughts or anything else. The floor is yours, my lady. Go for it.
Sure. So so I'm Petra. I am the sole operator, I guess, of Earthside Birth Services based out of Richmond, Kentucky. It's earthsidebirth.org. And I am a full spectrum birth companion. I'm not using the title doula anymore, actually, for several different reasons. But yeah, I'm a full spectrum companion for pregnancy, birth, postpartum. I'm starting to offer bereavement services. I feel like that's something that is really lacking in our culture and something that is much needed. So yeah, you can find me at my website start a little chat or contact me. And if you need me, I'm here. If you have questions, I don't really know.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I think just by showing the show in the chat, you've definitely inspired a lot of people and helped to bridge some gaps in lines of thinking and stuff like that. So that's always a really good thing to see. People really appreciate what you have to say in the chat. So have
Yeah,
a
I'm
feeling that you'll
appreciative of that.
yeah, you'll get at least somebody that might reach out and have questions or whatever. And so I think I included you have a phone number on your website too. So
Yeah,
so people know that they can call or text you. I think a lot of people like knowing that,
yeah,
because
totally.
some people don't email or they don't whatever. So well, awesome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I'm so honored that you came onto the Healing Home, and I don't think it'll be the last time. If you're open and willing and able, I'd love to have you back at some point. We can get further into some other topics as well and see how your journey's going.
That'd be great. I'd love that too. I'm so glad to have been here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and have a great night. We'll
You
see you
too.
later. All
All
right.
right,
Bye bye.
bye-bye.
All righty, y'all. That was a rally shish goomba episode. I really loved every second of it. And I just knew, as I said during our talk, that we would be able to go into some really great spaces together. And it sure happened. And I'm really happy you guys were all here for it. And, one thing I realized, I usually have my updates at the end here, and we totally forgot to upload them. So, what I'm going to try right now is I'm going to try and upload the slides that we have. And it might work and it might not work. And if it doesn't work, it's all good. But the first thing I wanted to say is thank you to all my patrons. I've got more people signing up, which has just been freaking lovely and awesome. And just really appreciate all the support you guys are throwing our way. And if my slide doesn't come up, Debbie Dufek was my latest patron that was added to our list. So sorry if I'm not going to be able to read through everything today. But yeah, just thank you so much. The support goes a long way. Shout out to Binna. Binna, I saw you in the chat. My lady, this deck is freaking amazing. The oracle that you sent me. I know I messaged you to let you know how much it's resonating, but I actually even pulled a card in the beginning because I've just been really vibing with this deck. So we pulled Nettle, which I thought was really appropriate for this episode. And it really kind of like the energy of Nettle was with us, the movement, the action here. So we talked a lot about just taking action, responsibility in your own life. And so Nettle is a good medicine for doing that. Next week's show is going to be with the lovely Maxine Miller. Now, this woman is a beautiful, she's just such a talented artist. She works a lot with plants, specifically poison plants. So I have one of her drawings on my wall, but she just recently came out with a magical plant oracle herself. And so we're going to interview Maxine and talk about her art. What's her inspiration for her art? Mario and I have had the pleasure of meeting her a couple times at the Northwest Tarot Symposium that comes through Portland every single year. And I was just tickled pink when she emailed me back and said that she would like to spend some time with us on the Healing Home. So that'll be really fun. Yeah, my slides are not going to load. So apologies for that, my folks. But yeah, so next week, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard, same place, same time with the Healing Home. We'll get into some art and some beautiful conversation with Maxine Miller. This month, I have my full moon offering still available. I've got calendula salt soap, I have mugwort, earth hag soap, and I also have my comfrey, nettle, and pine shampoo bars. I only have 2 shampoo bars left, and I've got, I think, like 6 of the mugwort soaps and like 4 calendula salt soaps. So as usual, you can email me, michelleshealinghome@gmail.com if you want to order any of those, or if you have any questions for me about anything. That's the best way to get a hold of me and place orders. We are going to be working on an online store. Ta-da! Finally, we're going to do it. We're at the point now where we're realizing that, I love being able to have the email correspondence back and forth with orders and stuff, but getting to the point where I think an online store is going to be the way to go. So that will be coming soon, probably over the next handful of months. But until then, as always, Michelle's Healing Home at Gmail. To place orders, you can go to michelleshealinghome.com to see the offerings I have. Go to my blog. You can learn about my consultation offerings as well there. And as I said, patreon.com/the healing home. If you want to become a patron, all patrons get my full moon offering newsletter a day before all the other newsletter subscribers get it, which gives you an opportunity to place orders before everybody else. And if you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can also do that on my website. It only comes out once a month on every full moon. So I'm not bombarding you with a bunch of emails or whatever, but it is the best way to keep in contact with me, know what I have available, and also appearances, interviews that are upcoming or that I have already done. And I think that's it. I think that's probably what our slides would have had. If you have any other questions, of course, just reach out. And want to just say thank you once again to everyone for being here. It was a fun one as usual. Feels good to be back home, getting back into the rhythm of things after being gone for about 11 days, which is a long trip for me. So anyway, glad to be back. Thanks for being here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Take care.